It's that time again. Welcome everyone. Today we're going to make a little Warlock's Tower ruin. It's a relatively quick terrain project, and it's got foam, super magnets, plaster rocks, and best of all, a small resin pour at the end. Now I always say I really truly believe in my heart of hearts that resin, like LEDs, makes everything better and instantly amazing. Now, if you're a D&D player, you probably have a favorite character or two kicking around. This is a great way to try some different terrain techniques without investing too much time or effort and cost and materials while building a cool display piece for your heroes and villains. These little bits of terrain are also great gifts and group party projects for your dungeon crawling comrades. But before we jump into the project, a quick shout out to my patrons W and Don C, dare I say trailblazers, visionaries, trendsetters. Thanks, you two. All right, let's have another random making encounter. Like so many projects, I didn't end up using this base for the cloche, but the glass part is still very doable, so I wanted to make sure that my mold for the resin would fit. I'm also using these little magnetic bases that I created. I'm going to post some files over on my Patreon account. A washer in the base of your mini and a super magnet, and these are really awesome for fixing things to these displays. When I try to fit something into a cloche, I don't want it too high so that it's bumping up against the top, but I don't want it too low. I want it to be kind of sort of the tallest part, depending on the whole thing, to be right at when it starts to transition into the curve at the top of the cloche. So it's not jammed up in the top, but it's not floating way down at the bottom. Once I've kind of got my height figured out, I mark it out on my bigger piece of foam, but I do need like the staff, what is that, Staff of Ra from Indiana Jones? I gotta take one kadam off for the height of the stand. So gotta take a little bit off. I'm using this styrofoam stuff that's packing material. Normally I would use XPS or expanded polystyrene, XPS foam. But for this, I'm going to use this nasty pebbly stuff to my advantage. It has one real magic quality to it. You'll see in a minute. The base was too big. There's going to be stone on top of this, so this is really just the core, so I needed to really whittle it down. Here's where the magic happens, though. If you just pick apart this, and this is going to actually be part of the tower, all of those little pebbles and beads look like little piles of rubble, and ye olden towers and walls were backfilled with rubble and debris, and so this works perfectly for that. It's a great way to get a little rock texture without having to create texture. It's just built into the bump. It's messy as all get out, and especially here where I live, it is extremely dry, and so static electricity, that stuff just basically clings to and follows you around wherever you go. I'm using foam rocks that I've cut and tumbled and rounded. A lot of people will use XPS foam and they will embed the texture of the rocks, and you can certainly do that. It's a little bit, I don't know if it's how much faster it is, probably a little bit faster, but it's more sculpting, carving, and texturing. But I feel like actually these stones, there's something more organic and more dimensional about them that really has a quality to them that is very difficult to get using sort of traditional engraving, embossing techniques. I'm not using any stones of any particular size. I'm just using what was in my big bin o foam which runs into some problems down the road. And normally, I think if I were to do something a bit more purpose-built and a bit more intentional, I would actually cut things to specific sizes. But these are fun. This should be a fun project. This is just with stuff that is laying around, kicking around, scraps of things, and just making it work. I want this to be fast and fun, relatively speaking. I don't want to have to bust out the hot wire cutter and make more rocks. I've got to, I always make more than I need, so I always have extras laying around. As I'm building stuff, I'm always trying to think about how it would go together, but I don't get too hung up on, is that structurally sound? But you do want things to feel like they wouldn't just completely collapse and fall apart. So thinking about how stones overlap each other and how, you know, they you know, there isn't going to be, you know, what's supporting the stones beneath it. I always think about that a little bit. And I always try to add a little bit of variability and randomness as much as possible to it. Random's hard. You know, we're really big pattern creators as human beings, and so it's very hard to be random. I'm going to throw some rocks around so that those get embedded in the resin. It's really nice to have dimensional things that are sitting in and soaking in the resin. And these are at the base of the tower. Now, would there be tower rocks right there? No, I don't know, maybe. Going to, if you've done any stuff like this, you know that the go-to is Mod Podge and paint. I don't really know why. I think Mod Podge, I think one of the benefits is that Mod Podge is inexpensive, so you can get a lot and goes a long way, but it also is a bit more, it's a bit harder than like an acrylic varnish, which might be a little more rubbery, a little bit more bendy. I'm not really sure, but you know, everyone uses Mod Podge, so let's use some Mod Podge. From here on out, it's really just a matter of kind of traditional dry brushing and you know, of the rocks from a dark gray to light gray. I use the cheapest possible craft paints, and I don't really mix colors. I try to find the colors that I want to use over and over again, because if I have to match something, it's a lot easier. You can just bust out the 4 grays that you always use and everything always matches. I really love projects like this because back in the day, back when abacuses were a thing and I was in college, one of my professors, and many of my professors, but one in particular, kept saying to me, Dalen, I want you to remember 3 words: more, better, faster. The more you do, the better you get, the faster you get. And I think that's true for the projects that I work on. It's easy for me when I'm working on a big diorama or a book nook to get really bogged down in the complexity of it. And especially, you know, when you're making videos of it and you're shooting video and you're working on the projects, it becomes like this, it's overwhelming thing, and you get obsessed in all the little details. And you don't really grow as an artist when you're doing that. If you work on one thing for 1 year, how much growth have you really achieved? Because you haven't really had a chance to explore a lot of different things. And that's what I love about these little diorama projects like these. I made a couple for some friends that were part of a campaign that they were moving and heading out of town. And so for their characters, I made a couple really specific little cloche stands for their minis. And it's nice because you can really crank through these, explore ideas, try different techniques. If you've never poured resin before, this is a great way to get into a very, very easy application of a resin pour, because you don't need to build a mold. So I really love these. More, better, faster. For the wash here, I'm using these Liquitex colors. One thing to note about the craft paints, and I've mentioned this in other videos, is they have a lot of filler in them, for lack of a better word. They're pretty opaque. And so if you really want transparent washes, you oftentimes do need to step up to something that's a little bit better quality. And then if you do look at what would be considered, and you can't see my fingers, air quote, artist quality pigments, some of them will also indicate just how transparent the pigments are. So when you're creating glazes and washes, it's really important to think about how transparent the pigment is from the get-go. I'm going to seal everything with some varnish before I move on to getting the moss and getting it all fungusy. I also have a lot of bags of these things. A lot of times I'll create like little custom mixes and put them in little shakers so that it has a little bit of variety in it. I think that's nice. Like you can see the little shaker here, it actually kind of sucks and it doesn't really work very well, but they were cheap, and so, you know, there you go. But by mixing up a couple different colors, you get some baked in variety, because nothing, again, is consistent in nature. There is no consistency and constant even color. Everything's a bit of a mashup. And so grab a couple different colors, mix them together, get some different blends going, and it can instantly add some variety. I always think too about like where stuff's going to grow. It's going to fall in the cracks and crevices. I kind of always hate spring because, man, weeds and nature, it's brutal. Resin, there are two, as I've mentioned, two things make everything better: LEDs and resin. And I just love pouring resin and making things with resin. It's just sort of instant amazingness. One thing to really always be careful is with your pigments, depending on what you're using, they can be extremely powerful. So these Alumilite colors are just a little dabble you do. You can see I'm just using a toothpick and swirling it in just a tiny bit just to pick up some color, and it actually goes still pretty dark for the amount of resin I'm using. It is transparent and not too bad, but if you're looking for something that's just a hint of color, you basically just need to breathe a little bit of color on it to get it to work. It's, again, such a satisfying part. You can see I'm dripping all over the counter and I don't have any paper down. It's okay. My workbench is a hot mess, so I just wipe everything down and clean it up after the fact. But if you are working on something that's actually nice, you definitely want to put some paper down. I'm not really trying to mix it here. I'm just trying to move it and swirl it and even it out. There's going to be some little foam bits. One thing to note on this torch, great way to pop bubbles, but this is basically, the tower is foam. It's foam foliage and it's foam bricks. So it's really easy to either light it on fire or melt your tower. So you could see I was very careful to angle it away from the tower, and I was just doing quick little bursts. A couple day later, this is the satisfying part. The release from the mold. It's just the best part. At this point, you could actually just be done with it if you really like that clean, glossy look. Sometimes that's really appropriate, but this is kind of a ruined Warlock tower, so we need a little bit of turbulence, and you will always end up with this little lip. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to fix that. Now, there are a bunch of different materials you could use. This material is really cool because you can create waves and ripples, and then it dries and it keeps the form. You can see it's very, very firm, but I'm not going to use the right tool. I'm going to use this water, which is more appropriate for your initial pour. And of course says do not shake, and the first thing I did was shake it, which generated all these bubbles, which was super awesome. I think both of those materials are very, very similar in what they're made from. And so as this stuff started to dry, you could start to mush it around and push it around. It just took longer to get to this stage. And I'm using a little fan brush to help create that shape of ripples, and I'm just moving the material around. Once all of that was dry, the project was done. Now, I think there are a few different levels of good. I think there's good at a distance where you're just like, if you're, halfway across the room and you're kind of squinting at it and it looks really good, that's good at a distance. I think there's good at sort of tabletop level. You're good up close, but not too close. And then there's good at as close as you can get to the Baileys without your eyeballs getting wet. I kind of feel like this landed in somewhere at the tabletop and wet eyeballs level. A little bit more specific and intentional detailing up close and personal with a brush on some of this would have probably brought it a little bit further forward. But I think for the time I spent, and again, going back to that idea of more, better, faster, I'm really, really happy with the results here. I hope you found some little tips or tricks, or at least just enjoyed spending some time looking at some foam rocks. As always, if you enjoy this content, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, be sure to ring the bell for notifications. If you'd like to support the channel, I really, truly do appreciate. Even at the free level, it's always good to see people join in at the free level. Pop over to Patreon. I got a poll running right now. We'll kind of keep it interesting and always have some fun things going on over there. It is always fun just spending a little bit of time with you, making, crafting, terrain building. And so, as always, thank you for hanging with me for 15 minutes, and we will see you again on another random making encounter.